Welcome. This is the Something Venture podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. My guest today, I'm very happy to have him here, Marcus Dantus. How are you doing?
I'm great, and thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this. This is fantastic. I've screwed up the names of like my last 3 or so podcast guests, and they've been very simple names too. So it's very embarrassing. So I'm happy to have said your name correctly.
You said it correctly.
Perfectly. Marcus is the CEO of Startup Mexico, and I have had the pleasure of going there. Startup Mexico, I'll let you explain it, but it's an entrepreneurial community in Mexico, which is something that, we're so self-absorbed in Silicon Valley and so inward-facing that we forget around the world there's these huge entrepreneurial centers. And I wanted to talk to you about that a little bit and hear what this is like, what it's about, what it's like being an entrepreneur and an investor in Mexico. I'd love to dig in and hear all about it.
Of course. Well, for starters, if you want me to explain Startup Mexico, it started as a campus for entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. The idea was we were trying to find what Mexico's entrepreneurship model should be. And this started because actually the government started saying that the Mexican government started thinking that Mexico was going to be the next Silicon Valley.
Yep, everyone thinks that.
And we had, yeah, exactly. And we had names, like ridiculous names, like the Mariachi Valley and the Tequila Valley.
Right.
And after a while, I spoke to the government and I said, look, I'm out if you guys start talking about the Mariachi Valley. Right. And I don't think that we should pursue the same model as Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, and it's very difficult to replicate, even for New York or Boston. I mean, Silicon Valley is its own model. Yep. So we started looking at what Mexico actually has. So we have several things that are very interesting. We have a very young population. Mexico has the median age is 27. Over half of the population is under 30 years old. So we have a lot of talent. Tons of engineers. We're actually the 7th country that produces more engineers per capita.
Interesting.
And it's a large population. We're about 130 million Mexicans.
Right.
We have commerce treaties with 68% of the world's GDP, which means that we have a great access to commercialize stuff. And geographically, we're right in the center between Latin America, a huge unexplored territory, right, and the U.S., the biggest market in the world. So we started thinking about all these advantages, and we said, well, our model should be a bridge for innovation. We should be able to bridge Latin America's innovation with the U.S. and with Europe, and U.S. and European and maybe Asian innovation through Mexico to Latin America. And that's how the campus started. The campus started as that, as a bridge for innovation, as a place where innovation and creativity and collaboration is fostered, and where we can actually generate our own innovation, but also invite others, to soft land in Mexico and to build this innovation.
It seems like there's actually a lot. There's a few entrepreneurial centers across Latin America. I just went on vacation to Mexico, and I was reading a book while I was there that's called "The Open Veins of Latin America," which I do not recommend you read while you're on vacation in Mexico, because it's basically about how it's this kind of lefty, but he's probably how Latin America got so exploited by Europe first, and then the United States later. And if you look at the exploitation he's talking about, a lot of just sort of wage exploitation. So when you're on vacation there, you feel a little bit guilty. Are you like, am I exploiting everybody here on vacation? But there are great, Mexico City, of course, and entrepreneurial centers across all of Latin America. I think Colombia, Chile, and Uruguay.
So it's very interesting. One of the most amazing characteristics of Mexico, in my opinion, is we are very creative people. Latin America in general. Yep. We're very creative because nobody solves problems for us. We have to solve them ourselves. And there's a lot of examples of this creativity. But nobody teaches us innovation. So this creativity remains as creativity, and we never innovate. And by innovate, I mean produce, worldwide solutions that help society and reach the market. Right. And again, when you think about Mexico, you think about the beaches, you think about tequila, you think about a bunch of stuff, but you don't think about innovation.
Right.
And partly it's because of what I just told you, and partly it's because we don't have an exit strategy market. We are, for example, the stock market in Mexico, 40% of it is owned by one guy. Yeah. 60% of the float of the market is owned by one guy. Mm-hmm. The whole country has less mergers and acquisitions than, say, Google.
Right.
So there's no exit strategies, and that inhibits the whole investment process in these companies. So these companies don't grow large, hence you rarely hear about any of them.
And I hear that around the world. And Singapore had this for a while, where nobody would invest big in companies in Singapore. And I talked to a venture capitalist who said, yeah, it's because there hasn't been a big hit yet out of Singapore. So I don't think I'm going to be the first guy. Then there was a big hit. Vicky got bought for like $150 million by Rakuten, this Japanese company. And after that, people would invest in Singapore because they no longer thought they were going to be the first guy. So how do you crack that? Like, how do you start getting Mexican companies acquired?
How do you break the catch-22?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we actually have an idea we're working on, which is to start bridging this by bringing companies to the U.S. And taking advantage of the exit strategies here, and then hopefully that will generate, these entrepreneurial heroes that will further grow this virtuous circle, and hence bring more investment into startups in Mexico, etc.
And why don't the super wealthy Mexican? It seems like some of these countries you have like one guy has the cement company, and one guy has the cigarette company, one guy has the telecom. And then they've always got one kid that's going to take it over, but they've got that other kid who has nothing to do, and can't they get that kid into the internet and invest some of their billions into tech companies, or aren't they interested? Or
well, there has to be a cultural shift, because Mexico, for example, is very adverse to risk in general. So people do invest money, but they invest in things like real estate or gold.
Yeah.
So again, this is changing, and it's especially changing now with the millennials and all that stuff. But it's still, it's still a way to go. The other thing that's very interesting is Mexico is a country where failure is not tolerated. And the weird thing about this is that success is not tolerated either. So success is punished in Mexico. If you're very successful, people start talking bad about you, and they know that you cheated somehow.
Interesting.
And failure is completely not tolerated. If you fail in Mexico, you disappear it from your resume.
Right.
Completely different than here. People don't collaborate in Mexico. So again, we're trying to change this culture in order to make it a culture that accepts risks and accepts failure and learns from it. But it's going to take a little while, and it's probably going to be a change that's going to happen in 1 or 2 generations, and then we'll have our entrepreneurial country.
And how does it happen? Like, the campus comes into being, you and the government, because that's not how it happened here. Here it was sort of Stanford and rich people. How did you and the government kind of come together to build Startup Mexico?
Well, it's a very long story, but Startup Mexico is actually a private organization.
Okay.
But it was initially funded by the government. The government of Mexico understands the importance of entrepreneurship, and they created these organizations that are fostering entrepreneurship and giving grants and loaning money to companies that are being innovative. The Ministry of Economy of Mexico actually was split in 2. It had the sub-ministry of SMBs and the sub-ministry of Commerce and Industry. And the sub-ministry of SMBs changed its name to the National Entrepreneurial Institute.
Wow.
And the importance is not just the change of name like it usually happens in these type of countries, but it's the change of focus. Now they're focusing on companies that actually can have some potential. Not just on little companies that will remain little for the rest of their life.
Right.
Mexico has a ton of little and micro businesses that never grow because they're not differentiated, because they don't innovate, because there's nothing there. It's just a business. So this change of focus is starting to trickle down to society, and it's starting to generate a very interesting generation. Let me give you one example. The Mexican government has created a couple of funds to invest in funds that in turn invest in startups.
Okay.
And just to give you the idea of the numbers, in 2008, there were 2 funds in Mexico, between VC and seed. Yep. In 2012, there were 14 funds. And last year, there were over 60 funds.
Wow.
So last year, there was actually more investment than in the 20 previous years in Mexico.
Right. Wow.
So this is exploding.
So change is happening.
Well, and of course, this is creating a ton of entrepreneurs.
Yeah. So who comes into Startup Mexico? Like, what is the guy or the woman like who walks in and says, "Hey, how do they become part of it? What are they? Who are they? Like, what's he?"
So we have several programs. The most important program we have is our incubation program. And mind you, in Mexico, incubation and acceleration are two completely different things.
Okay.
Incubation is when you create a company out of an idea, and acceleration is when that company is already in commercializing mode, and you help them grow. Right. So it's different the way we define it than the way you define it here. So our incubation program is the most important program we have. We've had over 9,000 projects come and present to us in less than 3 years. And we've selected 270 and converted them to companies. And after 2 years, and over 90% of them are still alive. Wow. So it's pretty good. Now, I would expect this number to go down seriously. I think that, we're not going to maintain even above 50% of projects that are kept alive. But so the way you enter into this is by competing. You present your idea, it gets evaluated, you go to a live evaluation, and then you get selected.
Right.
But we have other programs. We have academic programs. We have a program that teaches people that work in companies how to become an entrepreneur, for example. We have a program that teaches people with money how to become an investor. We have a program that teaches innovation. We have accelerator. We have some social programs. We have a plethora of things that we offer people that try to foster the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the entrepreneurial culture in Mexico.
So it's really becoming, is there the aspect of it being a community where people, because there's a really amazing physical space. It's a really impressive, even compared to a lot of Silicon Valley spaces. It's pretty nice. Are people interacting, and is, the thing that happens here in Silicon Valley, is that happening as well? Or?
It's starting to happen. It's going to take a little while. So for example, in Mexico, it's not normal that you become successful and then help others.
Okay.
Wow. So we're starting to try to show this. The reason I'm here is I'm bringing we bring a group of Mexicans every 6 months to this area to show them, the pay it forward culture and the collaborative culture. And
it's very weird. And I think it's only a Silicon Valley. I don't think that's a Wall Street thing or anything else. It's a very Silicon Valley thing that you just kind of help everyone out. Which is either because people are really generous, or they're very fear-driven because they're worried that they might be helping out the next Uber founder, and maybe they want to invest in it, kind of thing. But it works. Like when a bunch of people are helping each other out, it works. It works like amazingly well.
So we see that here, and also the way you guys network, etc.
Yeah.
And this is what we're trying to replicate in Mexico. But again, it's going to take a while. Yeah. But the good news is we already have 5 spaces like this, not just one, in different cities in Mexico.
Wow.
Much smaller.
Yeah.
But we're starting to replicate the model in other cities.
Yeah.
We actually have one, believe it or not, in Sao Paulo, Brazil now.
Really?
So.
And does it work the same way in different? It's not just like Mexico City, sort of the Silicon Valley equivalent. Is it more distributed there than it is here, maybe?
Actually, in other cities, it's very unique because these other cities don't have other entrepreneurial hubs. So they're very excited when they get started in Mexico, and they really want to participate. And we actually get much better communities there than in Mexico City.
Interesting.
But I think that's pretty normal. In the bigger the city, the less people relate to each other. So
I think that's right. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, everyone can't possibly end up in Silicon Valley. Like, it just makes no sense. And yet in the U.S., when people keep trying to start these other, Silicon Prairie in Chicago and things like that, like 1 or 2 companies come out of it, like Groupon out of Chicago, but the nexus just so seems here. So as people are traveling, as the entrepreneurs come to Silicon Valley, what is their impression of Silicon Valley? Like, do they realize how kind of intense it is? Are they surprised by it? Or?
You know that when we've asked that question, what do you think of the trip? The thing that amazes them the most is how open the companies are here about their future plans.
Interesting.
That is so funny because everybody comments on that. It's like, I can't believe they we were at Google and they told us what they were going to do.
Yeah.
And we were at Intel and they told us what they were going to do. Yeah. First of all, I don't think they understand that they didn't tell us all of what they're going to do.
And they didn't go to Amazon yet.
And the second thing is that it just amazes them that people are open and kind of tell you their stories and again help you, and this is new to them.
Yeah.
So this is the thing that impresses them the most, and this is exactly what I wanted, because this changes the culture.
Yeah, that is funny. That absolutely is sort of a Silicon Valley thing, where the first company you have, you try to get everyone to sign an NDA and all this, and then you realize like everyone else is too busy doing their own damn crap, trying to get their own thing to work. They're not looking for your idea. Like no one. And so after a while, you're just like, I'll just.
Well, I'll tell you something. This is something. Again, we're learning in Mexico that ideas are worthless.
Yeah.
It's about executing it, and people think we get a lot of guys that have this idea, and they think it's worth millions because they had the idea, and it's nothing. So eventually they'll learn.
Yeah, and you see that here all the time, where the guy who starts something, it's interesting. I mean, one of the examples, they kind of came back around, but Lyft was around forever. Kind of doing this thing where people would share cars, and it was doing okay. And then Uber came along. Like, you could have done it earlier. And they said, no, what you actually do is you do it this way, and you execute, and you go really fast. And Uber became huge. Like, they weren't the first car-sharing company by a mile, nor was Amazon the first online book company. But there's a huge advantage to seeing what other people do first and go, okay, that works. So I've saved all that time and money. People want to buy books online. That didn't work, so I've saved all that time and money. Now I'm going to come in, either by moving faster, by having more capital, or whatever it is. So it's almost like coming up with an idea is a disadvantage, being the guy who, and I should ask you if people do this in Mexico, doing the sort of like, well, this is the country version of that. Like, this is Instacart for Mexico. Or, in Germany, that's every entrepreneur you meet. They're doing like Airbnb for Germany. They're doing this for Germany, that for. There's not a new idea.
Well, to be honest with you, I hate that. I really don't like copycats. Mexico is full of copycats.
Yeah.
And we like innovative things. And matter of fact, copycats don't work that well in Mexico, because in the very least you have to innovate in the way you adapt it to the country. You cannot just do the same thing.
Yeah.
Because if not, why would you make the Mexican Uber when Uber is coming, and they'll do it, so they'll beat you.
Yeah, well, that is always the joke. I worked at the Friendster, the early social network, and our board of directors kept trying to figure out like what do people in the Philippines and Singapore and Malaysia, like what product do they want? What's special? It's like, they want the same thing as everyone else in the world. They want the same damn photo uploader, and now the people in the photos are their friends in the Philippines, not your friends in America. But they don't want something. They don't want Facebook for the Philippines. They just want Facebook.
Of course.
So I'm sure in Mexico,
with few exceptions, but yes.
Yeah. So I'm sure in Mexico people want Uber. Well, Uber's fine. They'll
And there's an added thing in Mexico. We look up to you guys. And things that are not from Mexico, that are from the U.S., are much more appreciated in Mexico than things. So, for example, let me give you an example of Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
When Starbucks came to Mexico, I thought it was not going to be a hit, because how are we going to pay so much money for a coffee in Mexico? Mm. $5 in Mexico is a lot of money for the average person. It's like one day salary.
Right.
And they're packed. And it's the status of having a Starbucks coffee. It's not the coffee itself. It's just the status of, I bought it at Starbucks.
Yeah.
So, again, why would you take Mex Uber if you have Uber, where, again, the price is going to be similar, but one has the status of being a U.S. company.
And so why are you doing this? Like, why were you excited about this? Of all the things in the world that you could have done, why this? Like, why building something in this startup community? Like, what made you excited about it?
I kind of fell into it, Kent. I wasn't looking for it, but I mean, in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. I've been an entrepreneur in Mexico, for a long time, 25 years. I was one of the first guys that started in the internet craze in Mexico. When Yahoo started, I started a website called Mexico.com.
Wow.
And there were like 5 entrepreneurs in Mexico. Right. And so from there to now, I've seen the change. And, I was invited by Telefonica to run their accelerator, like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And I really liked it. I liked I didn't like Telefonica that much, but I liked the helping startups.
Right.
And I said, you know what, this is something I could do for a while. And even now, many years after I was in Wyra, and now I have my own incubation space and campuses, I'm really excited every morning about waking up and helping these guys and seeing what the day is going to bring. And so it's actually a fun job.
So what are some of the companies like? Like what are examples of like?
Oh, we have a ton of stuff. So let me give you a few examples. We have a company here in San Francisco. Actually, they made it to the Valley eventually. They're called Bridgify, and they found that all smartphones have a chip that allows telephones to communicate with each other without a network.
Yeah.
So, like for situations where there's a disaster, or if you're in a stadium and the network overloads, or if you're in a cruise ship and there's no network, you can still communicate from one phone to another.
Oh, wow.
We have a couple of companies dealing with electric vehicles, like bikes and cars. So this company in Mexico, actually in a state called León, Guanajuato, in the city of León, they're building these electric bikes that are really starting to take off in Mexico. And they're both electric and assisted bikes, where you can still pedal, but it just assists you in the pedaling. We have companies, of course, tons of companies that have to do with web and apps, some very interesting ones. We have companies that have nothing to do with technology. We have a company that does about 130 flavors of popcorn.
Yeah, right.
Which is unbelievable, and it's really tasty.
Yeah,
and they're starting again to grow in Mexico, and large supermarkets like Costco or Sam's Club are starting to.
Oh, that's amazing.
To sell their stuff. So really, it's anything. We don't focus on anything specifically, and we get all sorts of projects. And then we have the crazy projects. We have a guy that's building a car that will fly.
Oh, nice.
It'll take him a while.
Yeah,
but
Google might buy that.
Right.
they seem pretty.
If you ever mix it, yes.
They seem pretty interested in that. So what do the Mexican entrepreneurs struggle? Is there anything unique that they struggle with that people don't struggle with here, or is it kind of the same?
Oh, no. We struggle with everything you struggle with in a hostile environment.
Right.
So we struggle a lot more. So again, we don't have... It's hard to find talent. It's kind of hard people that understand the entrepreneurial culture. The biggest reason why Mexican startups, or for that matter, I would think any Latin American startup or even Asian, or why they die is because the founders fight between each other because they can't handle the stress. And I'm not just talking when their company is doing bad. Also, when the company is doing great, if they get funded, they don't know how to split the money. Money management is a big problem. You have to understand, we are, as a group, we are much less sophisticated than startups here. Right. So it's not normal that a 25-year-old in Mexico understands finance and technology and how to manage a product and how to manage a company. And so in Mexico, for example, we don't use lawyers. We use lawyers when we have problems. And typically a startup doesn't understand that a lawyer is needed to not have troubles.
Wow.
All this stuff, everything I'm telling you is incredible. The biggest challenges, in my opinion, in Mexico are two of them. Exit strategies, so success stories. So again, they're very, very few and very far apart. And the second is that large companies and even Mexicans don't buy Mexican. So it's very hard for a startup to start selling, especially to a large corporation, because they won't buy from you. So how do you make money? So that's a big problem. So we struggle with everything that a startup struggles here, plus the fact that we are in a much more hostile and much more difficult environment to create a startup. In my opinion, if we bring a Mexican startup here that has a good product or a good service, they'll struggle less.
Right. Because
this is an environment where startups grow.
What do you think would happen, or what would need to happen to make it become a sort of more accepted or more popular? Like, would it be if somebody started a Google scale company out of Mexico City, would that change the landscape?
Of course, without a doubt. You have to understand, who are your heroes here? Your heroes are people like, Steve Jobs was a hero, Bill Gates was a hero, Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos. I mean, these are Elon Musk. These are your heroes here.
Right.
But it's not just here, all over the world. Look at the Niklas Zennström from Skype, or Jack Ma of Alibaba, or Charles, what's his name, from Virgin.
Oh, right.
So these are your heroes. These are the heroes of the world. In Mexico, these are not the heroes yet. So the heroes in Mexico are completely different. And we need the entrepreneur to become a hero in order for this to work. I feel very strongly about this.
And how optimistic are you this is going to happen in the next few years, 5 years, something like that?
This will happen. This will happen for sure. We are... So think about our ecosystem as an ecosystem that's like 5 years old. And it's going to take us probably 10 to 15 to create...
Yeah.
I don't know if unicorns, as you call them.
Yeah.
I don't even like that word, to be honest with you.
People are saying that anymore. It's such a weird...
Unicorns don't exist, so I don't even know why they use it. But whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about billion-dollar companies. I'm talking about $100 million companies.
Yeah.
If we start creating a couple of $100 million companies, people are going to start looking up to these guys. They're going to get really excited, and this is going to explode.
Yeah.
Because it's exploding without it.
Yeah.
So imagine with it.
Well, I have to ask, so Mexico relations with the United States, like, it seems like we have a lot of bad luck. Like, I remember there's about to be a really big opening when Vicente Fox was the president. He was about to come to the United States and do this big talk in Congress, and they're really going to open up relations even more than already, a lot of cutting down the border stuff. And he came, and his speech to Congress was going to be on, like, September 13th of 2011 or 2001, and then the 2001 terrorist bombings happened, and he just went, crap, and just turned around and went back. He's like, this isn't going to happen now. And now we have a new president here who's a little crazy about walls in Mexico. Just out of curiosity, I gotta ask, what are people in Mexico thinking? Like, are we going to be invited to come back?
No, look. I mean, again, we first of all, let me try to say things without being deported. But it's incredible to us. Right. But this election for you, the feeling I had when Trump was elected was exactly the same feeling I had when the World Trade Center was brought down in 2001.
Yeah.
It was like, how can this happen to that,
Yeah.
And this is how Mexicans look at you guys. We look up to the United States. There's so much stuff we admire from you that is now less admirable.
Yeah.
So I wrote an article actually about this a couple of weeks ago, which is actually published on the Huffington Post.
Congratulations.
But
That's amazing.
In Spanish.
Okay.
And the article talks about how I think Trump is actually leading you in the wrong way. And the whole article is about, you guys used to be an example of democracy.
Yeah.
And your democracy doesn't seem to make much sense anymore. I mean, this is the second time that people vote for somebody else for president and the other guy wins.
Right.
So your system doesn't make that much sense to us.
Yeah.
This guy is making the U.S. focus on not the smartest jobs. He's bringing back manufacturing,
right,
where you guys are already an innovation-based society. So all these things that are happening in the U.S., let me tell you, first, it's a great opportunity for countries like Mexico and others.
Yeah. China's having a great time.
I think you guys are going to go back a couple of decades if this continues. Second, I mean, healthcare, what just happened, this is unbelievable. Yeah. One of the beauties of the U.S. is that everybody was covered.
Yeah.
And to us, this is something that we don't know where it's going to take you. So the peso actually fell against the dollar. Mm-hmm. Because the perception of Mexicans was that we were no longer a wanted partner. Now the peso went back up because we started realizing, first of all, this is not convenient for the U.S. either.
Right.
It's probably going to hurt you more than us.
Yep.
And second, There's other partners in the world, like China,
Yep.
or like Europe, or like Latin America, and we can create these huge alliances. And third, because we shouldn't depend on you that much.
Yep.
So what we think is that I personally don't think it can last. I don't see how you as Americans can actually live with this for much longer. I think it's not just what he says; is he's doing illegal stuff. Now it's completely ridiculous now.
Yeah.
And at some point, I thought he was either super smart and is playing with all of us, but I don't even see that option anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to last too much. And if it does last too much, you guys have to know that the world is laughing at you.
Yeah.
The whole world is laughing at you. We can't wait for a G20 meeting to watch it like a reality show.
Yeah.
And see what he says next.
Yeah.
But every time he speaks, every time he, we met with a guy from the New York Times, and what he commented to us was, this guy brought back the New York Times to life. The New York Times was failing.
Yep.
And now that he declared it like fake news, now everybody reads it.
Yeah, and everyone's subscribing to it to make sure they stick around. So
we to us, it's just unbelievable. It's incredible. It's a surreal scenario. The only thing we're worried about is we're a little too close to you, for the next World War.
Right, yeah.
So we would love to move Mexico a little bit further south, just in case.
I hear you.
But that's it.
I grew up in San Diego, which was always a problem during the Cold War because we keep a lot of the military in San Diego.
Right.
So you think you're off in the corner of the country, but you're really not. You're a military target. Yeah, it's I think got a lot of people in the United States just in sort of a state of shock as well. And I think there's a lot of these practical things like relations with Mexico where you're like, it just makes so little sense. I mean, like it's these things where you say it and it kind of sounds like something, but it's ridiculous. Like, of course, people in the U.S. can't fill all the farm jobs in California. The auto companies are producing parts to bring back into it's just like, if you dig into it, just a normal small amount, it makes no sense. It doesn't help people. It's just it is like you say. I think surreal is a pretty good way to put it. There's a story going on. I don't even know if this is true or not. But in Mexico, everybody's convinced that. So Trump had a deal with somebody in Mexico to buy some land in Cabo, and apparently the deal went bad, and he had it in for Mexicans after that. Because I'll tell you something, it doesn't make any sense that he's, for example, so worried about the trade deficit with Mexico and trying to impose all these taxes, where the trade deficit with us is a fraction of your trade deficit with China. Yeah, for sure.
Or with other countries.
Yeah.
So why would he be so worried? It has to be something personal. Something really bothered him about.
Yeah.
It seems to me that he's that kind of person, that he's vindictive and that he wants to get people back. So
that's the most logical. Well, so across Latin America, what else is interesting? What countries are really kind of figuring it out as well?
So I think, Chile is a very interesting country, but it's a very small country with a very small community.
Yeah.
So it's a good country. It's a good example of what a Latin American country focusing on entrepreneurship can become.
Yeah.
I think Brazil is always interesting just for the sheer size of it, but it's very complicated.
Yeah. Right.
Then you have countries like Colombia and Peru, which are like Mexico, but a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
But those guys are up and coming, and they're going to come very quickly. Colombia especially. Peru is just beginning.
Yeah. I think there's big software companies in Colombia, right? Like maybe more of the outsourcing model, but a lot of engineering talent.
In Peru as well.
Interesting.
Everywhere, actually.
Yeah.
And, amazingly enough, I think Argentina is the best entrepreneurial country in Latin America.
Really?
The problem is that they've had an awful economy in the last year. These are the guys that actually have the most large companies created, like Mercado Libre, and these companies became billion-dollar companies.
Right.
Mercado Libre was actually acquired by eBay.
Yeah.
So, for some reason, they're like the best entrepreneurs. The problem is that as of late, these guys have so much economic trouble in Argentina that most of them have left Argentina.
You can't get your money out, right? So they are.
But now it's getting better, supposedly, but it's going to take a while for them to recover. So many of them are in Mexico or in Brazil or in Uruguay or in other countries. There's always Uruguay, very small little country, but smart people.
Fascinating country. The poorest president in the world.
And beautiful country, by the way.
Gorgeous country. Beautiful, kind of a beautiful, kind of fading city, but Montevideo is great. I think the president basically used to be what we would call like a terrorist. He was like a street fighter. And everyone just got so sick of him. They're like, let's just make this guy the president. Because they're just very live and let live. Like, make the guy the president. They don't enforce marijuana laws because it's too hard. Like, really amazing entrepreneurs there. It's a really cool place.
No. The president actually drove a Beetle.
VW. And you can say hi to him in a bar. Yeah.
So, look, I think Latin America has a lot of great entrepreneurs. And furthermore, I think it has a lot of problems that need solving, like serious problems, more than just an app, you know.
Right.
And that's going to create some very interesting startups in the near future.
Yeah.
Just like, and again, this is not just Latin America. This is happening. I see this happening in Kenya, and I see this happening in Thailand, and I see this happening all over the world. Yeah. I've been in all these places, and entrepreneurship is happening everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's interesting times.
Well, what should we leave people with, like, as they think about, sort of start thinking about Mexico as a place where there's entrepreneurship or where they might want to be involved, invest? Like, what thoughts would you leave people with on?
I'll tell you something. I used to say that if you knew the future, you'd be a millionaire, right?
Yeah.
Well, we know the future. What's happening in Mexico now is what happened in Silicon Valley a few years ago and what's happened in other places.
Right.
We are currently... we're not a third world country anymore.
Right.
We are a country in a transformational stage, and we're about to change from a country that is focused on maquiladoras and manufacturing and transformation to a country that's focused on innovation and knowledge, to a knowledge-based economy. And this is what separates a non-developed country from a developed one.
Right.
When this happens, the opportunities in Mexico are going to be huge, and this is happening now.
Yep.
So with a little bit of help, external help, especially investing, we can make this happen. And Mexico has to be an example for Latin America, for its size, because of the size of the market, because of its geography, because of everything I just told you before.
Yeah.
And we cannot lose our relationship with the U.S. You know that we commercialize over $1 million per minute between the U.S. and Mexico.
I absolutely believe it, yes.
So when you think about all of this, we are a strategic point.
Yep.
And with a little bit of help, we can transform into a great democracy with a great economy and a powerhouse. According to some forecasts, Mexico is going to be the 5th largest economy in the world by 2050. So why not help it and take advantage of it? And I think, again, we know the future, so let's invest in it.
What a great story. So thanks for doing this. How do people find out more about Startup Mexico? Where do they go or look? Or?
They can go to startupmexico.com.
Okay, perfect.
And they'll find a lot of stuff. And our Twitter is @StartupMexico. So
perfect. Well, thank you so much for doing this.
No, on the contrary. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right. Thanks. This is the Something Restaurant Podcast. Thanks for listening.